Have you ever wondered how a company goes from just a private startup to a giant corporation that you can actually buy a piece of? It's a whole process designed to raise incredible amounts of money, to build empires. But what happens when that very system gets too hot? When wild speculation takes over and the whole thing spirals into a national crisis, one that lasts for decades? Okay, let's get into it. So, here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with the basics, what an initial public offering, or IPO, really is. Then we'll look at who's involved in making one happen. And from there, we're going to pivot to one of the most incredible stories in economic history, Japan's massive bubble in the 1980s, its spectacular collapse, and the long shadow it cast, what we now call the lost decades. So let's start with that fundamental question, right? You've got a great idea, you build a successful private company, but what's next? How do you take it to the next level, to the global stage? Well, you take it public. You enter the world of stock exchanges, where ownership of your company is traded out in the open, and you can raise capital on a scale you just couldn't before. This is the destination. And the way you get there? That's the IPO. Okay, so let's jump into our first section and really break down this gateway to public investment. What in the world is an IPO? At its core, it's actually beautifully simple. An IPO is just that moment, that transition, when a company goes from being privately owned, by its founders and early investors, to being publicly owned. It's the company's big debut on the stock market stage. And IPOs have been around for a long time. The idea goes all the way back to the Dutch East India Company. In India, a major trailblazer was Reliance Industries back in 1977. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, the world's largest IPO ever was Alibaba, which raised a staggering $25 billion. But look, this isn't as simple as just putting a for sale sign on your company. An IPO is a super complex, highly regulated machine. So let's take a look at the anatomy of that deal. Right. So to keep things from turning into the Wild West, you have government bodies that play a huge role. In India, for instance, it's the Securities and Exchange Board, or SEBI. They're the referees. They set the rules and make sure the whole process is fair and transparent. Okay, so who actually gets to buy these brand new shares? It's not a free-for-all. A huge chunk, up to half, is set aside for what they call qualified institutional bidders, or QIBs. Think of these as the big fish, banks, mutual funds. The biggest of them are called anchor investors. The rest of the shares get divided up between other bidders and, of course, retail investors, which is folks like you and me. So you see, this whole system of regulators and different types of investors, it's all designed for order, for stability. It's supposed to be a controlled launch. But what happens when the economic world around that stable process becomes a rocket engine of pure speculation? When that orderly system gets swept up in a nationwide frenzy? Let's get to our case study. And that brings us to Japan in the 1980s. I mean, this country was an absolute economic powerhouse, a true miracle. Confidence was through the roof, and investors were chomping at the bit for the next big thing. But then, in the mid-80s, something started to change, and it kicked off a period of, incredible escalation. The trigger, believe it or not, was an international agreement called the Plaza Accord. The goal was to weaken the US dollar, but for Japan, it meant their currency, the yen, shot up in value. Just look at these numbers. In a little over 2 years, the yen went from 237 to the dollar all the way down to about 128. It basically became twice as strong. That's a massive, massive shift. And what happened next was like a perfect step-by-step recipe for inflating a bubble. First, that super strong yen started to hurt Japan's exports. So, to juice the economy, the Bank of Japan slashed interest rates to a record low. Suddenly, money was dirt cheap to borrow. This flood of easy credit had to go somewhere, right? And it poured into stocks and real estate. Asset prices just went into the stratosphere. And if you need one single fact to understand just how utterly insane things got, this is it. At the peak of the bubble, the tiny patch of land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was valued at more than all the real estate in the entire state of California. It just makes no sense. Prices had completely left reality behind. This whole mania climaxed on the very last trading day of the decade. Japan's stock index, the Nikkei, hit its all-time high of nearly $39,000. Fueled by all that cheap money and a constant stream of hot new IPOs, the market had more than tripled in just 5 years. The party was absolutely raging, and it felt like it would never, ever stop. But here's the thing about bubbles. They always pop.
The Bank of Japan got seriously worried about this overheating economy and finally decided to hit the brakes hard. And this was the point of no return. So the central bank started hiking interest rates in mid-1989. But just look at how fast everything fell apart. The market peaked that December, but just 8 months and 5 rate hikes later, the stock market had lost half its value. Then real estate followed, and by 1992, the collapse was complete. This chart just says it all, doesn't it? It shows how brutal the fall was. In less than 3 years, the Nikkei index plummeted by over 63%. We're talking tens of trillions of dollars in value that just, poof, vanished into thin air. The party was officially over. But the end of the bubble wasn't the end of the story. No, it was the beginning of a long, painful aftermath that would completely reshape Japanese society. One of the biggest problems was the emergence of these zombie companies. These were businesses that were basically bankrupt, but banks kept lending them money just to avoid admitting how bad their own losses were. It clogged up the whole economy, like a blocked pipe, preventing healthy companies from getting the capital they needed to grow. And this economic stagnation wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It fundamentally broke the social contract in Japan. That old promise of lifetime employment, of total job security, it was gone. It was replaced with downsizing, outsourcing, and a whole new era of economic instability for millions of families. And the pain was just so persistent. The economy was stuck in the mud for so long that they actually had to update the name for it. What everyone first called the lost decade of the 90s just kept going, and eventually became known as the lost 20 years. And that brings us to our final thought. The story of Japan's bubble is this incredible cautionary tale about how fast and how far things can go wrong. It really forces us to ask, we know markets have booms and busts, it's natural, but where's the line? What are the real warning signs that tell us a healthy boom is inflating into a dangerous, reality-defying bubble?